Hi everyone, I'm Anna Valegia, Manager of Alumni Career Services for the NC State Alumni Association, and welcome to our Facebook Live Career Chat where we'll be discussing the entrepreneur in you. So we have Lewis Sheats with us here, and we are very excited to discuss the topic of entrepreneurship. So just to give you a little bit of information about Lewis, he is an alumnus of the great NC State, and he is an award-winning entrepreneur and educator. He has identified and developed several unique ventures from launch to profitability, and has raised venture funding and bootstrapped several ventures from concept to exit. He serves as the executive director of the NC State Entrepreneurship Clinic, an initiative which exposes students to experiential learning, embeds them in the entrepreneurship community, and provides the resources needed to execute their own ideas. So he is a faculty member of the NC State Poole College of Management and is devoted to preparing the next generation of entrepreneurs. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Great.
We are very excited to just talk to you about this subject that you have so much experience with. So just to kind of get us started, I think a lot of things that we hear is this idea of an entrepreneurial spirit or the entrepreneurial mindset. So can you just define that for us?
Yeah, the way I look at the entrepreneurial mindset is really about how do you address problems. So that has to begin with, first, how do you see them? So recognizing opportunities and problems that might exist, then coming up with a solution, and then being able to articulate that to the right person, which could be a boss, an investor, or somebody you want to join in that venture.
Very good. So would you say that somebody with the entrepreneurial spirit or mindset, do they always start their own companies and own their own businesses?
Yeah, not always.
Okay.
And it's often a misconception that an entrepreneur has to own their own company. And specifically what we do at NC State is teach the idea of having this mindset no matter where you are. It does apply to launching a new venture and having your own business, but it can also apply to working in a small company or in a large venture or even inside the government.
Sure.
Again, recognizing and understanding how to solve those problems.
Very good. So when someone is, they have the entrepreneurship spirit and they're looking to start a new venture, but they really don't know the concept or new idea that they want to embark upon, how would you suggest that they look for this, I guess, inspiration?
Yeah, so if we look at most concepts, they're going to come from three different areas. One, which we're all familiar with, would be solving a problem, right? So we look at things that bug us, things that we've talked about pet peeves earlier, pet peeves that might consistently happen, right? So that's the first sort of bucket we would look at, is trying to solve a problem. The second piece would be recognizing a gap in the marketplace, and gaps are typically formed by two large major players in an industry, or geographic gaps can happen. So it refers to a market that's not being addressed. And then the third would be a change in the environment. When we talk about changes in the environment, we're talking about technological changes, social changes, economic or political and regulatory changes. So being aware of the things that are happening around you and what might lead to a new company from that, or a new product inside of another company.
Yeah, so with that, do you think that somebody has to be passionate about a certain industry in order to be successful in that area?
So passion helps for sure. You got to be passionate about something. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that industry. If you're passionate about the growth of the venture, that could be what drives you. If it's the passion of solving a problem, that's great too. So you do need some drive, and passion helps, but it's not necessary that you have to really care about a particular industry to get in there and solve something.
Okay, very good. So let's say you have an idea and you are really excited about it. How would you, what do you do next? Maybe you have a product, or you have a new venture, a new service that you know is going to be beneficial. What do you do next?
Very first thing, every time, you should go talk to who you think that customer is. You're only one data point, and oftentimes we come up with concepts where we are the customer because we're the one that experienced the problem, or we recognize there's a gap there.
Absolutely.
But you have to make sure that you're not an anomaly, that there's enough people out there that actually have the same problem, or feel the need that niche filled. So go talk to people, ask them and listen what they say. You don't know what you don't know. So until you have that conversation and validate the idea, don't do anything else. Go talk to people.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say that you have this entrepreneurial spirit, but maybe you're not ready at this point to kind of start your own organization. So you're going to enter into the workplace. How would you say that you could utilize this spirit into something in maybe corporate America?
Yeah. So especially younger entrepreneurs, I often encourage them to go work somewhere else, learn on someone else's dime, right?
Yes.
So mitigate your risk is what we're trying to do here. You can still be an entrepreneur inside of a company. And the way you do that is, again, recognizing those problems or those gaps, and then being able to tell your boss or a board or an investment group inside the company of a new product or a new division or new service that your company can offer. And using that entrepreneurial spirit or mindset to develop and create this value, which then creates more value inside the company.
Absolutely.
Everything sort of grows from there.
Very good. And if you're just tuning in, we're with Lewis Sheats, the Executive Director of the NC State Entrepreneurship Clinic. So one thing that I think, kind of building off of what we just talked about, where someone has this entrepreneurial spirit and they're looking to incorporate it in the workplace, how do you sell that it's a positive thing to employers, maybe in an interview or maybe even listening on the resume? We can kind of break down those ideas.
So if we're talking about the spirit itself, I think talking to a potential employer or your current employer, it really is about how you're going to approach problems and recognizing that you're going to think differently than the other employees. So selling that story to them is important. And ultimately for your employer, that you are going to create more value for them, and that you're looking at different verticals inside of the company versus just the one piece that I'm just going to cog out every day. If it's more that you have a side venture or another hobby, it goes more into your story that you one can multitask, one that you recognize that the experiences you can learn from this other venture can be brought into your current role into the company, which goes back to decision making, problem solving as well. So I think depending on where you are, it could be a combination of several things.
Do you have a particular advice on how to tell the story, maybe in a resume, LinkedIn interview kind of format?
Yeah. Yes. So what I like to do, and when I'm hiring someone, whether it's for NC State or if it's a new venture that I'm part of, I want to know that that person is going to come in and add value to the company, like I said earlier. So how are they going to do that?
Yeah.
So telling the story of how you recognize something and actually acted on it versus one of the key things in entrepreneurship is the action part, not just the thinking and coming up with ideas.
Think and do.
That's exactly right. And that's why we are such a good entrepreneurial university. But it is that do part. And to show a potential employer that, one, you can recognize opportunities and then you'll act on them, that's a pretty powerful piece that you can sell to a potential employer.
Yeah. And I do want to say, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those as we kind of go along. We have some that we're going through, but we'd be happy to take some questions live from you. So I think kind of on the same line, but maybe from a different perspective, if you are a hiring manager or someone who is looking to, just hire a new candidate, why should you look for someone with entrepreneurship? I know you kind of touched on it, but from their perspective, how can they maybe even see what that looks like, or how do they look out for it, I guess? Sorry.
Yeah. So if you take any organization and look inside of the organization, if you're not growing, you're going to become stagnant. And we've got great examples of companies from the past that just sort of withered off and died.
Yeah.
And we won't name them live, but there's been some great examples of that. And typically that is caused by not innovating, not recognizing new opportunities that company could go after, and sort of doing the same thing every day, day after day. And then eventually there's no more customers left, or not enough to keep the business going.
Right.
So if I'm a hiring manager or running a company, I want people that are working for me that recognize that the market is going to change, the customer is going to change, their wants and desires, how they get their products going to change, and be ahead of that, be prepared and be able to deliver that and keep that customer base, grow the company, and that will keep you around much longer.
Yeah. Do you ever see maybe larger organizations give a little bit of pushback for candidates that might have these kind of side businesses, side hobbies, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, and it's dependent on the job, right? Typically, when we see that, it's based on fear of intellectual property, right? So if you're working in a very scientific type position or engineering position in a company, there is some reasons for an organization to fear that you're taking some of that intellectual property that belongs to the company outside of that. And so there's some reason for that, but it's more about making sure there's some separation there, and that what you are doing is not in conflict with the company that you're working for, but is helping you in your skill sets that you are bringing into the company. And selling that story is key. Yeah.
How would you recommend telling that story to make sure that they're not turned off by that side gig and it actually is a benefit?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would typically do is just go through the process and explain if I were, going to my boss, explaining like, this is what I do in the side business and side job in terms of how do I sell to customers, or how do I develop new products, or how do I organize the people that are working with me if it's more than one person, and then show them that's how I can bring those skill sets to work, right? And that if I continually practice outside of work, I'm going to be a better employee for them. It is about storytelling and making sure that it fits. It's well-rounded.
Yeah, and like you said, you can help develop other skills outside of the organization that maybe you're not able to.
And it's also adds to the fact of recognizing that you can multitask, right? You can think and do several different things over a period, and you're not working 24 hours a day for one person.
So would you always recommend putting it on your resume, on your LinkedIn, as you're applying to different positions, that you have multiple jobs?
I can't think of an instance where I would say not include it. Because one of the biggest things that is part of your story is that you tried it and that you've done it, right? And for an employer to recognize that is key, right? Where some confusion comes in sometimes is how an employer defines the entrepreneurial mindset. So you'll see things in job descriptions, for example, that talk about critical thinking or innovative or go-getter.
Absolutely.
Like, it's up to you to connect the dots for an employer, potentially, that go-getter is really that entrepreneurial spirit that you have, or that creative thinking that they're looking for. This is how you've applied it into your own entrepreneurial venture. Even if it was successful or not, it's still pretty important. Yeah,
which
exactly.
Is good. Yeah, absolutely. So we did have one question come through. So what do you feel is one of the biggest gaps in today's marketplace and someone new to entrepreneurship could fill?
So, man, that's a loaded question. The biggest gap in today's marketplace, I don't think we can answer that in 30 minutes. I will tell you, I can give you an example I read yesterday. I thought it was pretty cool. In fact, in the class I'm teaching right now, we just finished talking about gaps in the marketplace. So it is pretty relevant. But I'll give you a couple examples and then let that sort of drive the thought process of what a gap is. One example that we all are aware of is a gap that Home Depot or Lowe's create. So Home Depot and Lowe's, two market leaders in the home improvement space. I'm from a little rural town in North Carolina that's not big enough to support a Home Depot or Lowe's. So there's a geographic gap there. And in that town, it happens to be satisfied by a general store, a traditional old general store. But in the more mainstream, it would be filled by Ace Hardware, for example. So Ace sort of fills that market gap in those smaller areas. Even, doesn't have to be rural, but even smaller areas like downtown Raleigh, for example. And the one I read about yesterday I thought was really cool is a company that's focused on handicap accessible travel. So we take for granted about access to a hotel or an Airbnb, for example. And if you are in a wheelchair, for example, is a Airbnb that you're looking at actually wheelchair accessible? And they're really focused on developing this entire model of providing that handicap accessibility to their patrons. It's pretty cool. Yeah, and that's a gap based on a part of the market that's not being addressed or not being addressed well. Yeah.
So what about if it is somebody who's brand new to entrepreneurship, like they've never started their own company? When I know you mentioned when they identify an issue like that they would go out and just kind of look for the customers and kind of ask the customers. I guess, though, at that point, what else can they be doing? I mean, funding-wise, maybe even. I know it's a big topic.
Yeah, entrepreneurship is all across the board. Like you can start a company without having to raise outside funding. That happens all the time. Or you can start a company where you raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's a lot of stuff in between there.
Right.
It's what I would do after I talk to the customer and validate, I start building, right? So we're going to build through iterations, and then we're going to go back to the customer and say, is this what you would actually want or use?
Right.
And then continue to build through that. The question of funding is, how much money do I need to actually do it? And do I need money to scale and build faster because of competition potentially, or typically competition, or losing my place in the market, right?
Yeah.
So that's typically what drives the fundraising aspect of it, but not always.
Yeah. Very good. So it looks like we had another question come in, and feel free to send those in. We'd be happy to answer them. So how important is it to be a part of a networking group focused on entrepreneurship for support?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So like you said, I'm in my bio, I am an entrepreneur. I've started several companies, and entrepreneurship can be very lonely, extremely lonely. The first company I started, other than my wife, I don't think I had anybody really to be able to talk through some of the issues that we were facing.
Yeah.
Today, it's changed in our ecosystem, and it's because of these entrepreneurial networks and co-working spaces, and really a thriving ecosystem, specifically here in Raleigh, but we see this all across the U.S. Being in those networks or co-working space or ecosystem is helpful for really one major thing. One, to show that you're not crazy, and to help you through the confidence building and validation of the concept. We talk about our students in the clinic. We're housed downtown in HQ Raleigh, and part of that reason is no matter what concept or idea a student might come up with, it's going to be hard for them not to find somebody in that building that hadn't already thought about it before.
Yeah.
Being part of that network gives them an opportunity to ask and learn very quickly. So we basically shorten this learning cycle and this learning curve for somebody that's going to go launch that company. And network can be tremendously valuable.
And resources too, if somebody's been through it before, right? And you can kind of talk to them about the process.
The resources could be the information and the experience, but it also could be introductions to mentors and advisors, potential customers or suppliers, and then maybe investors if that's the right path.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I guess in your opinion, how do you define success for an entrepreneur? And you're an entrepreneur yourself, so you can kind of speak to your own experience.
And broadly speaking, I talk about success as value creation. And there's a lot of gray area in terms of what does value creation really mean. So there's a lot of metrics out there that people look at. Maybe it's revenue or number of hires, or one that I'm not a huge fan of, but how much money you raise. People will define success. I'd like to define success, especially because I'm dealing with students so often, is are they somewhere where they're really happy? Like, you find something that you're really happy doing every day.
Yeah.
And if you're in that position, that's successful for me.
Gotcha.
And that could be launching a company, or it could be inside of a larger organization, but you feel that you're adding value and you're creating value for that company, or either way.
Yeah.
That's my short answer.
Yeah. Well, and it feels like you're not working, right?
Yeah.
It's something that you enjoy going to and doing.
Yeah. You actually, when you talk to entrepreneurs, you often hear that. Like, I don't think of it as work.
Right.
I live that life, I believe, and my wife will vouch for that I don't have a time clock. It's 24/7. And that's just the way you think, because it's not a job. It is a passion.
Right.
And there's so much
It's a lifestyle.
It's definitely a lifestyle.
So we had another good question come through. So does NC State Entrepreneurship offer continued education or services like business plan review for alumni?
So to some degree, yes. And there's lots of different opportunities out there for that. I'll speak specifically about what we do in the clinic in terms of how we engage with the alumni or outside community.
Okay.
And the way we do that is having them come to us and using that as consulting or case studies for the class in real time. So the clinic model is based on this hospital teaching model where we replace the doctor with an entrepreneur and replace the patient with a real company. So for an example like this, that could be a project that's submitted to the clinic where students can then surround that entrepreneur and help vet a market or validate a market or create a marketing plan, or like this question, help add value to the business plan, or at least help them write it. So,
yeah. I think some of those networking groups too, like the Alumni Entrepreneurs Network and things like that, just having other people that have the same passions or interests around you as resources too.
Absolutely. Yep.
So kind of just your take, an advice question, I guess. What is one piece of advice you would give to an entrepreneur? And we'll kind of break it up. The first part is just looking for a job in corporate America. So what is it? Yeah. So just to reiterate, what is a piece of advice you give an entrepreneur who's looking to work a corporate role?
Yeah. So if you think about all the other people that are going to apply, you have to figure out how you're different. And
Absolutely.
what's the differentiating factor? And typically it is the entrepreneurial mindset and spirit that can differentiate you. So being able to tell that story correctly on your cover letter or application is key, right? And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of understanding how to solve problems, understanding how to solve problems quicker, or coming up with solutions, not just identifying problems, but coming up with solutions, and then articulating them correctly to the right person. That in itself can give you a leg up in that application process. Pick the right employer too, right?
Yeah.
You want to go work for somebody that's going to recognize the value that you're bringing as an entrepreneur into that larger corporation. It's a two-piece equation there. Pick the right employer and then make sure you tell the story correctly.
Yeah. And if they don't see the value, it might not be the right fit for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it might be one of those companies that's going to not be around in a couple of years because they're too stagnant.
Exactly. And the job description can help too, and kind of identifying what that company is looking for. If they want somebody with that spirit, or if it kind of seems like they just want to do the same things they've always done.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes that's clear. So, okay. On the other side, what is one piece of advice you would give to an entrepreneur who wants to start their own business?
It goes back to a question earlier. The first thing is go talk to customers. Validate if it's really a need. First, is there a need? And then are there enough people with the need? If we look at those two questions, and then the last one is it worth it? Is it personally worth it for you to do this? If I'm looking at those three questions, then the next step is to do it, right? And that's the differentiator. Everybody talks and thinks, but it's the do part of the think and do that's key for entrepreneurship. So actually acting, and that could be building that first prototype. It could be incorporating, which I don't recommend doing immediately. Wait until you actually have a company before you get to that point. But there are steps you can start taking that lead you to the path. It doesn't mean you got to quit your job and go start a new company. You can do a lot of things in the meantime before you get to that point. Yeah.
And so you live the life. There's a lot of really good ups and some downs as well. So how do you overcome failure in that process?
You should learn from failure every time, right? There are definitely ups and downs. I try to sort of live in the middle, but when you're riding the highs and lows of entrepreneurship, recognizing on the lows, what can you learn from it, and then apply it. So we create this cycle, this feedback cycle inside of entrepreneurship, that when we get that feedback, good or bad, that the next time we come back around, we've learned from that and we continue to move forward with our concept. So listen to your customers, listen to your employee, the people working with you, your partners, and make sure you were learning through those lows.
Yeah, definitely. So just had another question come through. If we've already made it through product development in our companies, are there any resources NC State alumni can utilize for marketing, partnerships, and press?
I don't know if I can answer that question. Yes, I think there's a couple of different ways to answer this. One is hack your way into using NC State to share your product. So using the Alumni Association through social media, sharing it with you. The Alumni Association does a great job of telling stories, but they need to know the stories, right? So making sure that stories being passed along. Also, I encourage alumni to stay engaged with faculty members or their departments they graduated from, because like we're real people too, and if we hear this story, we can help spread this story as well. And then again, the clinic is a easy, low-hanging fruit in terms of a resource and to apply and then help and have access to students and faculty members through NC State.
Absolutely. And are a lot of the faculty members that work with the entrepreneurship kind of program, are most of them entrepreneurs like yourself? Or a lot of them? I guess?
Definitely the faculty are entrepreneurs there, and they're all across campus.
Okay, yeah.
So engineering is represented, agriculture, obviously Poole College is represented, but we have a really cool, diverse group of faculty and students inside the clinic. Yeah.
Very good. Lots of good resources out there. So as we kind of wrap up, is there anything else that you would kind of want to say or make sure that that somebody else who does have this entrepreneurial spirit, something to kind of take with them?
Sure. A couple things. One, entrepreneurship is extremely fun. It's hard. It is not easy. It's not an easy path to success, however you're defining it, but it is very rewarding. So take the action. Actually, don't just talk about it, and actually do, and the reward will be outstanding, and something that if you haven't tried it, you won't believe it until you experience it.
Yeah, the risk versus reward, right?
Yeah, mitigate risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and just follow us on social media. Go Pack and howl back.
There you go.